I want to introduce you to a really, really important concept when it comes to our health and well-being. And I introduce it in our new book as part of this concept of how our health degenerates and ultimately can regenerate. And if you understand this, you have a really, really powerful tool to not only regulate and heal yourself, but be aware of every single action that you take in a day. How does it affect this system? And what I'm talking about is your nervous system. And I'm going to go into quite a bit of depth in this one because it is really, really important. But how it relates to this concept of degeneration of health. First of all, it starts with our genes. And ultimately our genes, our strengths and our weaknesses express depending on our diet and lifestyle. And of course, we talk about that a lot in the book. But interestingly enough, is the next stage down is I introduce this concept that your nervous system and nervous system balance is a critical factor in how your body operates. Because when your nervous system gets out of balance, literally it's the communication system that tells our body what to do. And unfortunately, our lifestyles these days are so far removed from how we were designed genetically. And if we rewind 100 years ago to where our genetics are designed for our body to operate, we live this radically different life. And ultimately, this fast-paced life, this life full of stimulation, it's impacting our health in a severe way. And in the book, and you can see this diagram behind me here, I introduced this concept where it shows the importance of nerve supply for our body. And it's, as I said, it's how our body communicates. And when the nervous system is out of balance, particularly our parasympathetic nervous system, because there's two branches in our nervous system. One is the sympathetic and one is the parasympathetic. Now, we have control over our sympathetic nervous system in terms of that's our fight or flight or our stress or our conscious actions of what we're doing during the day predominantly influence our sympathetic nervous system. It's the go side of our nervous system, whereas the parasympathetic is the unconscious side. So it's our digestion, it's our heart, it's all these functions in our body that we don't necessarily have control over. But unfortunately, these two systems really don't work very well in parallel. And if we're stuck in this sympathetic nervous side of things, sympathetic nervous system dominance, it has significant impacts on our whole body, particularly on our digestion, which is the next level down in terms of the degeneration. But all of our endocrine system, our hormones are all very, very much pinned to our nervous system function and our balance. And one of the really cool things, if you want to really balance our health and get your body into a situation where it can heal itself, where it can sleep well, where it can regenerate, it's super important that we make sure that our nervous system is balanced. Now, I want to take a little step back again for this and throw a concept out there for you that hopefully will resonate with a lot of you. We live, as I said, a very stressed lifestyle. The way we live now is very removed from the way nature intended. But all of us are exposed to so much suffering in this life. And if you think about anyone, there's very few people, if any, that go through life that do not suffer in some way. And it starts from a very, very young age, and we carry that suffering with us. We almost train our nervous system to be on high alert to dangers within our environment, perceived and non-perceived. So I'll use an example of that. Let's say that you as a small child in kindergarten get confronted either through a teacher or through another child or whatever it is, and there's some form of trauma that happens there. It doesn't need to be big. It can be being pushed over, being bullied, being spoken to the wrong way. All these events through our life, and there literally are thousands, and it comes into our teenage years where we're exposed to a lot of social pressures and we're trying to understand how to fit into society, what works, what doesn't work. We've got issues with our parents or we don't have. We've got issues with our relatives. We've got, as we grow into adults, we've got relationship issues that create trauma in our body. We then get into the work environment, which creates issues, and we all have those bosses that create stress. And all these let's call them micro and macro traumas. Yes, so we lay that with macro traumas. So someone dies, a dog passes away. Our lives are just layered with suffering, and we just largely ignore that in society, and we don't talk about it in terms of its health consequences, and they are significant. And if you, as most people, have gone through all this suffering in your life and continue to go through this suffering, then it has a significant impact on your nervous system. And when your nervous system is in a sympathetic dominant state, your adrenal glands particularly are constantly excitable. So we've got elevated levels of adrenaline, we've got elevated levels of cortisol. This impacts on our levels of blood sugar. It then flows into how we sleep. It affects our immune system. It affects our hormones. It affects our digestion. And to use an example there, a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome and digestive issues, it's all related to our nervous system and that nervous innervation, because your digestive system will not work optimally when you are stressed. And if you've lived a life where you're predominantly in a stressed state, it has significant effects on your health. So when you go to the doctor when you're 50 and you've got elevated blood pressure, they're not thinking about these accumulation of traumas in your life that has led to this point that is potentially at the core of why your blood pressure is elevated. Yes, there's other factors, and if you look at that tree of degeneration I talk about, it starts with your genes, then it's diet and lifestyle, but then it's that nervous system and how we regulate our nervous system that plays such a significant role. And then we start to get into this disruption of cycles that causes these symptoms to develop. So I want you to really, as part of this whole understanding the concepts I produce in the book, is understand that health, your symptoms are just signposts, warning signs of the body being out of balance. But what I'm trying to tell you now is the state of your health in many, many people, particularly if you're that type A personality where you're constantly overthinking things and just your mind is on constant alert, then this is a big factor in your health balance. And if you really are interested in regressing your health and improving it, you've got to understand this concept and take steps to calm the nervous system. And we have tools in terms of Happy Calm and MSP and even Happy Hormones to balance your hormones out. But the real work that comes into is first identifying that you're carrying a lot of trauma. It accumulates in your muscles, it can create headaches, it causes a disruption in your nervous system that then disrupts every other function in your body. And I refer again to that diagram, have a look at it in the book. It explains why so many people have so many range of different symptoms. You have to take a step back and not just look at that symptom, look at where is this coming from. And I would guess to say that 90% of people, a lot of your symptoms are to do with this accumulation of trauma and suffering that you've carried through this life. Now, once you understand that, you can take proactive steps to do two things. To balance your nervous system, so breath work is critically important, and I have talked about that before. Cold exposure, exercise, getting back into nature, disconnecting from technology as much as you can, understanding that there are positive and negative relationships in your life and you choose to engage in those relationships in whatever way, understanding that am I responding to situations with the right response, because we become trained from that very young age to react in different ways. So there's a whole lot of spiritual growth that needs to come as part of this. And our bodies are these whole beings, and we don't talk a lot about it, but that spiritual growth, and I'm not talking about that God relationships, I'm talking about that relationship with yourself to understand, how is my thought processes impacting on my health, and doing those aspects I talked about before in terms of breath work and exercise have a really powerful effect on regulating that nervous system. And then you can do that deeper work to understand, why am I this way? Is that trauma with your father, with your mother, at school? What is that suffering that you've been through in life? And most of us go through a lot of suffering, and then changing your relationship to that. And I listened to a really good podcast the other day that sort of basically said that, you need to walk towards suffering and because as soon as you try to avoid it and see suffering as a bad thing, then you're only compounding the issue. So if you change your relationship with that, that can also help as well. So there's those physical tools, happy, calm, MSP, happy hormones, but doing that work to keep your nervous system in balance. And stress and suffering is accumulative, but so too is relaxation. And putting priority into that in terms of your health journey. And yes, folks, those 4 pillars we talk about. So we've got diet and lifestyle, we've got exercise, we've got sleep, but we've got mindfulness that I talk about. And this is where this comes in. And that mindfulness helps to balance out your nervous system. It helps to start to step back and release some of that trauma that is inevitable in life. You can't get away from it. And when you understand this principle, you can actually do some really powerful work on your health. But you've got to have that honest look at yourself and step back and go, well, hey, maybe my irritable bowel syndrome has come from me overthinking and not releasing that stress level, because when you're in that state, you cannot digest your food properly. So it's not the food, it's your nervous system imbalance that has caused the problem. Maybe it's because you've lived on hyper-processed junk food that's caused the problem, but often there's a very strong relationship with our minds and our nervous system balance in all digestive issues. So have a read of that chapter particularly and start to understand that. You've got a really powerful tool to start to be your own doctor and manage your own health. Let me know if you've got any questions.